All right, so welcome. Figured I'd have a bit of a yarn about a presentation I did recently. And one of the first
Mhm.
people that came to mind to have a chat about it was Vib. Hey Vib, how you doing?
Okay, let's do it.
Just for a bit of a background for those just tuning in, my name's Chad Renando. I'm a research fellow with both QUT and USQ, and also the director for Startup Status and for the Global Entrepreneurship Network. And based on some of that work and work I've been doing around measuring the ecosystem within Australia and support for entrepreneurs, I was invited to present at the G20 Roundtable on Entrepreneurship for this year. And of course, being the way it is, it was virtual. So I was able to present with representation from other countries. And the main focus was on hearing about what are our countries' responses to COVID-19 in relation to support for entrepreneurs and what's coming up in the future. And I've worked with Vib on and off for a few years now. And just by way of introduction, Vib's one of the thought leaders in Queensland, if not Australia, around data, measurement. And we've shared the stage at a few panels and presentations in the past talking about ecosystem and measurement. But Vib, might just hand over to you to a bit of an intro on who you are and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Chad. And it's good to hear that G20 is continuing the tradition of inviting thought leaders and people who are into the ecosystem and share the views. Because I remember in 2014 when G20 was here in Brisbane, and we did sort of similar presentations when I was with the city. So I am the data culturist, what I call myself. And I work in multiple. It's a portfolio career. So I work in academia. I work in two businesses which I'm running, and also I work in policy on policy innovation, policy design area where I work with government and try and provide evidence-based decision making to the policy and policy for innovation and entrepreneurship. So I've been doing it for the last 2.5, 3 years. And in the data space, I've been there for the last 10 years.
And you do really kind of cross over some of the different disciplines. Like you do work in academia, but you're also a manager of an innovation program, and you're also a co-founder of a startup yourself, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So as I said, the core of everything is data. But what we're trying to do is build a business to help young Australians, build a business to help academics, and also running a program called Litmus with QT Entrepreneurship, where we help researchers who have their research as a product, and if they want to take it to the market through entrepreneurship way, which is building a business around a problem they care for. So, and that's where we come up with a framework. There is no one framework. It depends on the researchers, but then we work with each team and individual researchers to help them take the product to the market.
Cool. And with all of that experience, definitely would be interested in your take as we kind of go through the slides I presented at G20. And feel free to, you haven't really seen them before, but are they accurate? What's your take on as far as the Australian? Because it was a bit daunting for me presenting, thinking here I am representing all of Australia and here's the current state. Do I have it right? Obviously, it's just so, it's different for everybody that looks at it. It's different from the entrepreneur versus the government versus somebody running a hub. And even from, Sydney to Queensland to, somebody who's doing an Indigenous program in Alice Springs. So it's pretty diverse.
I think it comes down to the narrative. Then what data is it? So what's the narrative around whatever we are sharing with different audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And so definitely interested in your take on kind of what narrative comes through in this. So as I said before, the presentation was for the G20 Roundtable focused on entrepreneurship. This came about after a session they had in 2016, and they set up an entrepreneurship research center over in China. the roundtable, this annual assessment every year to see how are we tracking all these things from different countries came about. One of the first things I opened with is, Australia's kind of middling as far as representation in entrepreneurship. Round 1 in 10, based on recent Global Entrepreneurship Monitor results, highlighted 1 in 10 Australians are involved in some sort of early stage entrepreneurship activity, whether it's within an organization, what they call nascent or early stage, or new business ownership, entrepreneurship within institutions, and all up around between 10 to 11%. But we are number one in intrapreneurship. And over half of Australians think they have the capabilities to start a business, and just under half think they have good opportunities where they are to start a business. Now, this is the top line presentation, obviously, as you're wanting to represent well within Australia. Within Australia, though, one of the things we can talk about is we also have a fairly high fear of failure, which then may lead to wanting to but we still have that entrepreneurial spirit. So is it safer to do it in organizations? I'm kind of wrestling myself with this narrative on we know we're entrepreneurial, but a lot of the entrepreneurial activity we have is for existing institutions and for the place we work, as compared to maybe other countries who immediately go outside their company as well as outside their country. What are your thoughts on that, Vib?
I think there are multiple ways to look at this data point. I mean, there are multiple variables why entrepreneurship is very high in Australia. It could also be a culture. So in Australia, if you see, we have very flat culture. And what a flat culture does is reduces the hierarchy. And when there is no hierarchy, you have autonomy and freedom to take decisions on your projects. So if someone is able to have that autonomy and able to take decision on their project, to run the project by themselves, come up with new ideas to run the project, it's kind of an entrepreneurship in itself.
So
then
you're saying
you have...
So there's something about the company culture itself that then fosters entrepreneurship as compared to other companies which may be more rigid and not allow that?
Definitely, 100%. So it gives, as I said, gives them that the framework to play with. Here is the framework. Like you were playing in soccer, so you have that square, you play in that square, but you are free to choose how you want to play. You want to play left or right or center, mid. You can choose to play. And I think because we don't have a lot of hierarchies, the decision-making power is pretty good with middle managers and senior managers. So that's what I think. How would I rate this slide when it comes to the entrepreneurship?
Yeah, interesting. And just a note on the data point from this, it is from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. In 2019, the GEM report, as they call it, which is a global comparison, it's been going since 1999. It actually ramped up to about 10,000 interviews, both online, 5,000 online and 5,000 random phone. It's the only randomized representation of what the general Australians think about entrepreneurship, as compared to just popping out a survey to say, hey, whoever finds the survey can answer it.
Yeah, it will also be good to, if we have the 10,000 sample size, we can always break the data into large organizations versus small, medium enterprises and see how that entrepreneurship differs.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the next things I went into, so we know that Australians are fairly entrepreneurial in some sense, and in some areas more than others, but our ecosystem as we know it has grown fairly rapidly. And it's interesting, I was going back to past presentations other people had done at the roundtable, and the National Innovation and Science Agenda, or the ideas boom of 2015, 2016 did feature in some of the early roundtables. Mm-hmm. And regardless of what you think about this, as far as was it effective, was it not, did it hit the mark? It was a narrative, and it was such a strong $1.1 billion narrative at that time. And again, you can say, was that an expression of the growth that was already happening? Did that help foster the growth so it happened? Which one was causal? Regardless, we saw a massive increase between 2014, 2016 of innovation hubs, co-working spaces, technology parks, events, award programs, hackathons, the ecosystem as we know it. In fact, most of the ecosystem you look around today wasn't around 5-6 years ago. But we did also start seeing a leveling off 2018, 2019, both as a result of saturation, meaning, a region will only support so many innovation hubs, as well as a bit of rationalization of business models. And you've obviously been a part of all of this, Vib. What's your take on it, having actually lived it?
I think what innovation agenda did, Malcolm Turnbull's, was created a buzz and excitement in the ecosystem. That, hey, we have a flag bearer who's saying, okay, innovation needs to happen. And as you mentioned, a lot of activities of innovation and entrepreneurship started around it, which was, there was a cash, there were people, they're motivated. And as we know from Kaufman's books, that we need 997 people to help 3 entrepreneurs in an ecosystem. So we have 997 people to help those 3 entrepreneurs who work in some way, and they will come out of 5 or 6 years later. But I also believe that if you follow what Karl Marx used to say, that you convert knowledge into an action. So we have that knowledge of what is innovation, what is entrepreneurship, and how do we build innovation-driven entrepreneurs in a system, in a society. What is the perception of entrepreneurship among the society? So what it did, corrected a lot of those things. So perception of community perception around entrepreneurship, students' uptake in entrepreneurship courses or starting a venture, entrepreneurship education. So what it did is created knowledge. And now what we have to do after what we see in the graph is plateauing a little bit, 2020, we have to convert that knowledge into some sort of action. And what does that action look like? I don't know. We don't know. We will see in 2 years' time how that action looks like.
That's a really good point, and it's something I was really conscious of because I was part of that. I ran a hub from 16 to 18, and we were all making it up as we go. And those business models themselves are startups. They require not in the technical term, but they are new business models that's trying to figure out their own feet at the same time as they try and help others. And we really are starting to see some of them mature, go to the second, third stage, which kind of gets to the next point I was going to be making in the presentation, where we've seen a focusing. It's distributed across Australia. We've got essentially custodians of the narrative in each state, and a concentration, a critical mass of activity, where the ecosystem is established. Whether it's effective or not, is it the right one? Does it have the right focus? But these are more maturing conversations as compared to an innovation hub in the first 6 months just says, look, I'm an innovation hub. After 3 or 4 years, you can start saying, well, what type of hub are you? And what's your take on kind of the distribution, the concentration, the numbers? Do we have enough? Do we need more?
Don't know, like if we have enough or have we reached the critical mass or not. But I strongly believe personally that we should share our stories even better. So whatever we have, we are not sharing with each other really well. How I see it is maybe because of the geography, is less mobility between cities in Australia. If I'm comparing to Europe, so high mobility, people can meet within 2 different countries and cities within 6 hours of difference. And it's less in Australia. So we need to share more than others about the stories. So every hub, what I see on the map, every epicenter of innovation and entrepreneurial activities, we need to share more and have that common narrative, national narrative around it. But I also believe that what is also doing in terms of the community perception and the business perception about entrepreneurship is converting people from risk awareness to risk seeking to risk taking. So I believe that we are at the point where we think, hey, risk is good. Is how do we mitigate that? So somewhere we are there, and these hubs and groups have helped a lot to shift the dial from what we were in 14 and 15. So I think we can't say number of the hubs or these entities are good. What we can say, how effective they are in mobilizing a regional community, mobilizing a group of people. If I have a hub who's working with the deep tech and doing it really well, just 2 deep tech companies in 1 year, if they can churn out, is better than 10 other non-performing ventures. So I think what we need to see, what is our mission? So if we have a mission, we can have 3 or 4 mission and we work around that mission.
That's a really good point as far as the role of the ecosystem, almost like that custodian of the narrative. Yes, we had a big hit in 2015, but at some point that narrative needs to get down to the local level, needs to be supported, needs to be aligned by everybody there, and also aligned across Australia, as you say. And I think we are just starting to figure that out. Like obviously when everything starts up, they look after their own backyard, and like the Queensland narrative and the New South Wales narrative and Victoria, South Australia, et cetera, and even ACT's got some good stuff happening there, WA and Northern Territory, and they all have their flavor. But then what binds us together as far as an innovation nation? And that's something that we do see in some of the other ones. Like I posted these numbers up there, and I'm kind of looking at that, and that's having watched that growth and having actually mapped and identified all of these spaces over time. You start getting proud as the numbers, not necessarily that more is better, but again, as you say, we have that critical mass. And then you watch China's presentation. And then 200,000 incubators, and you're like, oh,
incubators,
that's all right. Yeah.
And I mean, that's again based on the population share.
That's right.
The numbers. But we again, I mean, if you want to say Australia in 2025 at 2035, or Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne in 2035, 2045, who we want to be known as. So Montreal, we always associate with AI, deep tech, deep learning. What Sydney should be, what Brisbane should be, what Melbourne should be known for in the next 10 years. So
right.
if we have that mission, we can have a founder-led kind of mission.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I appreciate about the G20 is, like being able to hear from China and hear from Germany and hear from France and hear what's working over there, maybe some of the ecosystems that are more mature, so we can almost see on the horizon what we have coming up. And to that point, as far as what we can be good at, one of the things that really strikes you as you look at the ecosystem across Australia is that diversity. We've got, from medical, biotech, ag, resources, obviously, defense and space, aerospace, business, fintech, and on. It's just a sample. And everybody's involved in all of it. You've got the government, the community, industry, risk capital, universities, and all focused on that one thing of the entrepreneur at the center. And then you can also put around the periphery, connected to all of it, is your technologies, your AI and your blockchain and your VR and AR and creative tech and on and on. And so there's this wonderful cross section that we have, this fabric that's being created, the breaking down of the silos, which then, as we say, we then need to say, how do we then expand that in across geography, and then focus in certain areas, but still have that connection. So the stuff they're doing in space and defense down in South Australia, and some launching up in Northern Territory, is connected to the agriculture that we have coming out of Queensland. It's the fintech coming out of Sydney, and the health and the focus on the bio down in Melbourne, and obviously resources over in WA, like on and on. And how do we get that connectivity? Because the innovation happens at the cross section.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And we have what you can call it like a competitive advantage in these areas. So we know we have a deep expertise and knowledge in this, and we can convert that knowledge into action very easily.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, like, pulling out of the Tech Board's recent report around risk capital, which is, I think across Australia is probably, as far as a bottom-up approach, one of the better ones, as far as being able to just find out what's happening on the ground on a month-by-month basis. And so they do these annual, these regular reports. And because one of the things we have to watch out for isn't just more numbers. More hubs isn't the solution. More government programs, more dollars supporting entrepreneurs isn't necessarily healthy, as we've seen in some ecosystems where that can actually be a hindrance. But the other proof point we can look to is their investment. And again, that's not necessarily success, because you have a whole bunch of investment that's not mature and whatnot. But we are seeing increased investment. We've seen increased investment even through COVID, which is interesting. And the increased investment is across all the aspects, meaning it's diversity of investment types from angel to VC to crowdfunding. It's amounts of investment, so both big and small, and numbers of investment. So from my take on it, not, I'm just a fairly unsophisticated investor myself. It looks not too bad as far as the approach. What's your take on it?
I agree. I agree. I've been speaking with a few financial engineers in the last couple of months during COVID, and they mentioned they deal in options and hedge funds and equity and a lot of cash mobility here and there. Also deal with forex, so the foreign currencies, and they mentioned that there's a lot of money available for different type of funding. So it could be private equity, could be loan, and could be seed, could be different pots of money. What they are struggling to do is find where to invest. So if they, let's say if angel investment is happening in one area, and if you know angel investors, they invest together. So 5-6 people bringing put up money and making it big and investing in a venture or in a system. So how they do their due diligence on those ventures, those firms, there's a lack of connection. I see what I felt from the discussions from these people who are managing the money, that there is a capital, there are entrepreneurs, but there is a fog in the middle, which they don't see each other in somehow, which I don't know what does that fog looks like. Is it fog because there's this lack of the traction from the entrepreneurs, or lack of market, or lack of internationalization, or we don't know that fog. So I agree, there is a money, there is capital available. How to mobilize that nationally, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It actually came up in our Slack community the other day of ecosystem leaders, and somebody's asking that exact question. Why is it that some entrepreneurs, some founders, just seem to get into that right stream, that right connection, get the right profile, and other ones who may, for all outside views, seem to have a viable business and be going well, but they just can't seem to get that traction, not traction with the customers, but actually traction with the ecosystem, traction with the investors. It is a bit of a challenge. How do we break down that fog? But I'm encouraged by some of the things I am seeing in the ecosystem. I guess maybe that's one of the things we can call them is the fog breakers.
Yeah, yeah, fog breakers.
And obviously, COVID came along, and everybody's afraid. Is COVID going to add to the fog? And COVID did have an impact in Australia. So I just went through 3 points, and a lot of the presentations at the G20 focused on the 3 stages, as it were, where there was an initial impact, and all the effort was like, how do we mitigate the impact? And the second one was, how do we help in the immediate to help them recover? And then finally, how do we help people in that transition, in this new way moving forward to sustain it? And so I'm just going to go through those 3 things quickly. First, we did lose 800,000 jobs. Like, it was just a big hit, like everybody. And those jobs weren't felt equally, both by age of people, by demographic, by sector. 35% down, over a third in accommodation and food services, over a third down in recreation. Obviously, tourism got a massive hit. ICT only down 10%. And we did see some incubators and entrepreneur support services close or move internal to organizations such as the universities, as especially universities start to rationalize because of the loss of additional revenue from international students. However, based on a survey they did of about 15 top VC funds in Australia, only 4 to 7% of their portfolio experienced job losses, and quite a few of them were increasing. So obviously a lot of startups in telehealth and digital and the new technologies. And we saw increases in certain sectors: financial and insurance services, public administration, obviously to help with the public good, agriculture up 9%. And we saw some manufacturing sectors start to pivot in early responses to the PPE. And I think our overall investment, $259 billion, 13% of our GDP. It was one of the largest in the world as far as a stimulus package. I think second only to Qatar. And And then we start talking about a recovery. What are we doing? So the R&D tax incentive review there came through, and they're going to continue on with that. Supporting for business to take advantage of digital technologies, $1.5 billion. Keeping in perspective, it was $1.1 billion just for the all of innovation. This is $1.5 billion over 4 years just for manufacturing. And so to me, that's a real commitment. Now you can get into the nuances and, you know, what part of it goes to where, is it really going to help out? But the fact is we've got a narrative, we've got an initiative moving forward to help support it. Is it enough? Is it helping early stage? Some people always get missed, but we can work through that. But it is saying that we're doing something. What are your thoughts on it?
I think we've been very lucky, one, that we were not that affected by COVID, one. Second, I think all thanks to the Australian population and the community that we sort of followed the rules. We were compliant, and we kind of crashed the second wave as well. If you look at Melbourne, Sydney, Victoria, New South Wales. So in terms of recovery, we might be able to recover faster than other countries. And if you look at our neighboring countries where we do our business, which is Asian countries, they're also recovering faster. So it's going to be playing out for good for us, because we didn't have much impact domestically, but also international markets where we deal with on day-to-day basis. I know America is one of the biggest customers, but as we go in next 5 to 10 years horizon, we'll be dealing more with Asian countries, and those countries are looking better. In terms of stimulus packages, I think it's excellent, generous, and the target, as we discussed about mission-oriented strategies. And we had to do this modern manufacturing strategy. We had to do this. The localism aspect of manufacturing has to come, and we kind of lost it in the automobile, and we were kind of losing it in the pharmaceutical industry. But now I think with this package, which is 1.5 billion, we should be able to get back on our biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, or local boutique manufacturing using 3D printing or medical manufacturing. And it's going to be a huge boost, because Australia has one of the best engineers in the world. We know that. And even just in Brisbane, we have one of the highest number of population density of engineers. So, and we have this tradable skills from mining. So if the mining is phasing out, we can always reskill those people, engineers, into making something else. So I think I'm very, very optimistic and positive with Australian economy for next 5 to 10 years, with hydrogen, with biotech, with pharmaceuticals, with local manufacturing supply chain. I think we've been lucky, and we should be able to get back on it based on how well we adopt new technologies, what we have to play with.
It's some good points there. A couple of them. One, as I was presenting, I did become aware, like this has hit everybody differently, right? Everybody's stimulus response is different. Like a lot of them feel the same. Like we use some of the same levers as far as rate cuts and manufacturing stimulus, things like that. But the variation quite often is what their current state of response to COVID is and how they're going. And we even saw that in Australia. The economic impact on Victoria versus Queensland and some of the others. So I think there's a sensitivity that we need to be aware of there, but also, like you say, looking at the global stage, who are our trading partners now? What are the impacts? While at the same time, a little bit of national strategy to be able to support ourselves at the same time is making sure that we can manage that transition. I think that may be a word for 2021, both transition from COVID, transition from heavy resources, transition to new technologies in agriculture. How do we support that? And it's the same but different. Like obviously there's ups and downs. It's life. There will always be suffering. There will always be high points. We've had the GFC. We had the post-mining boom bust / capital versus operations investment, however you want to frame it.
Even since the World War I, we have ups and downs is a
That's
part
right.
and parcel. So
It
all the
is.
white, gray, and black swans will keep happening.
That's right. That's right. We'll keep living in the aviary. But we've got,
Yeah.
uh, but we need to look at this one and say, okay, well, what's different? How do we learn from it? This is some great work coming out of the Labby project with QUT, tapping into some of the government statistical data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And just looking at the startups, the number of entries, not startups, the technical term, but number of entries of businesses and the exits. And obviously the exits are being propped up at the moment by some of the stimulus. And so we can see that we can expect a rapid increase. We shouldn't be alarmed by it, but then how do we help those businesses that are going to be going under to help transition?
Yeah, I think Australia is one of the places where the ease of business or ease of doing a business or ease of starting a business is the friction is quite low. So the entries, I'm not surprised to look at the entries. What I will be looking at in this data is the rolling average of exits. So we know from the data that in the runway for a new venture, be it small and medium enterprise or technology-driven entrepreneurship, the runway is 3 to 5 years. And sometimes even a good business dies off for multiple reasons. So if we look at the rolling average of exits, it could be close of the business or M&A or something. We might be able to see some stories and narratives that what is happening. Otherwise, in terms of entries, I'm not very surprised with entries in the market, because it could also be ride sharing or Uber or Uber Eats, and it could be those entries because every avian counts. So those avian could also be a sole tradership or as well.
And
I don't know if this entry has.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so if we need to look at into the rolling average and see how that plays with entry versus exit.
Yeah, and there's additional work being done in Australia as the kind of greater sophistication around startups, and how do we isolate startups out of this as well, which comes to close to wrapping up on just looking at what are some of our success stories. What are some of the big names that we keep seeing? I do a bit of a scan of the Australian Financial Review and saying whose name keeps popping up, and how many employees do they have, and when did they start? Because we have all these hero companies, not realizing these startups, these new technology companies. Obviously, Atlassian, not quite a startup, but it was in the day, And so the point I made during the presentation is that the companies that we're starting now are going to be the ones that we read about as success stories in 5 to 8 years. Sometimes you get the 1 or 2 year ones that pop up and wow, they're growing big. It's getting more and more rare though. It's usually just a 1 to 3 year, holy crap, it's competitive. Am I just like everybody else? Am I going to go under? Year 3 and 4, I'm getting a bit of investment. This seems to be okay. Year 5, I make the fin review, and everybody's like, oh wow, you're an overnight success. And so that they obviously produce employees over a short period of time, and not just employees, but employees quite often with investment, which means that if there is a liquidation event, if they do get investment, they can get funding, and then they start their own startups. And that was the point I was trying to make here, is that those companies then go on to create new startups as well. But I've seen a few references to Atlassian engineers going off and being part of other companies and potentially partnering with some of the people that are going to be exiting out of COVID to create a whole new round of companies that we won't know about for another 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, as you know, the recycling of entrepreneurship happens, and people who are entrepreneurs, let's say in Atlassian, who have seen and done that, they will spin out and they will start something. And that's how the philosophy of atom works. So if in an atom you have a nucleus, and these guys are creating that nucleus, making that nucleus stronger and stronger every day. And once we have the nucleus very strong, and one of them can't live there in the nucleus. They'll go out of the outer layer, create something, and invest back in the nucleus. So they will. It will be good to see spin-offs from Atlassian, spin-offs from Culture Amp, and spin-offs from Go, and see someone who came out of Go and they've started something else. But definitely, it's a really good story to see. We have so many and diverse companies. So you have education, you have strategy, you have software, you have safety, insurance. I mean, looking at the safety cultures, kind of partnership with QBE is exciting.
Absolutely.
Working in the insurance space and using safety is very exciting.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, the fintech, the, like as you said, the edutech, business models, and there's like heaps of other ones which I didn't put on there because the employee counts are lower just because of their business model. But like, you know, you got Tritium with the energy sector and the you know, the electricity fueling stations, and you know, some of the space tech ones. You know, building rockets only takes so many people, and everybody can be a SpaceX, but it's still really clever stuff that's happening.
Yeah, Gilbert Space, they're a totally different market. Even the Marietta and the low orbit satellite company is also very good. They're doing well. So definitely, nucleus is getting stronger.
Yeah, yeah, I like that metaphor. That's good. So I then just closed off with a few final points, just saying, look, we are seeing the you know, what can we learn and observe from 2020 heading into 21? The disruption that we're experiencing is going to continue the specialization and transition that we've seen. In 2015, the ecosystem was to some extent all things to all people, and now we're really getting good at one or two things based on geographic place, and so that's exciting. Disruption is a bit of a motivation. We haven't had a down year. We didn't have that fire under our bum to get us going. A little bit of burning ambition, but nothing really to push us along. And so this has been a bit of a wake-up call, which I think isn't necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, being sensitive to some of the challenges people are going through, but how do we help them through that? And you know, maybe if entrepreneurship is one option through that, we can support that. Motivation for collaboration. You know, people working together to face a common challenge, a common foe. We saw a heck of a lot of that. Some of that collaboration has gone away, but we are seeing it still cross industry sectors, cross government, cross university, breaking down some of the traditional silos. And finally, how do we use this disruption to leverage it for other shared challenges, such as, you know, focusing on, you know, females, youth, indigenous, remote, regional, other segments of the community that might get missed out, and thus we're intentional about it. How do we align with other major, you know, global challenges like energy and climate impacts? And how do we continue this diversification across the sectors from ag to resources and things like that? What do you think?
I think it's a great observation, and it summed it really well. Different parts in different areas, but together they are mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive. If you know what I mean. So they are really, it gives a good picture, and it also tells me that the certainty is not security. So we know we learned it hard way, let's say. After COVID disruption, we know that even if we have a certainty of having an economic growth, is not secure, because we live in a connected world, and if someone out there sneezes, we will catch the cold. So we need to make sure that we have the local economy, all the skills, all the nucleus is stronger. So I think it's a very good observation where you have captured the female entrepreneurship and indigenous entrepreneurship. It's very important to see how we see ourselves, the mindset.
Yeah, yeah, and that sneezing and catching a cold metaphor isn't so metaphoric anymore, is it?
Yeah.
But Vib, thanks for a bit of a chat. We've gone. I had 8 minutes to get through all of this in my prezzo. I think I used 6 for them, and we've gone into more. But I really appreciate your insights because I respect kind of the depth of knowledge you have in so many different areas. And again, coming from that data perspective, it's really good to hear your views. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And obviously, in the And the links below this video, I'll be putting contact details for Vib and myself. If you want to ask any other questions, feel free to have a conversation about it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So thanks, Vib.
See ya. Ciao.
See ya. Let me just